I'm Sarah, 28 years old, and this Christmas just destroyed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Mom stood there in her festive apron, serving everyone their holiday plates with a bright smile, until she got to me. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, but there just wasn't enough food. I must have miscalculated." But somehow, there was plenty for my brother Jake's girlfriend of 3 months, Chelsea, who got not one but two helpings of everything. That moment of watching Chelsea laugh while I sat there with an empty plate wasn't just about dinner. It was the moment I realized my own mother had been systematically erasing me from this family for years. Before we dive into this story that'll make you question everything about family dynamics and favoritism, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you curled up on your couch, maybe dealing with your own family drama? If this story resonates with you, hit that like button because trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. And definitely subscribe, because family revenge stories like this don't come around every day. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because what happened next will show you exactly how deep family betrayal can go, and how sweet justice tastes when it finally comes around. Growing up in the Morrison household, I learned early that love came with conditions, and I apparently never met them. Jake, my older brother by 2 years, could do no wrong. When he crashed Dad's car at 17, it was boys will be boys. When I got a tiny dent in Mom's Honda at 19, I paid for repairs for 6 months and heard about it every family gathering for years after. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Jake got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the college fund that somehow never materialized for me. When he dropped out of his expensive private university after 2 years to find himself in Colorado, Mom called it following his passion. When I graduated summa cum laude from state school while working 2 jobs, the conversation lasted exactly 30 seconds before pivoting to Jake's latest adventure in craft brewing. But I told myself it was normal sibling dynamics. Some families just work differently, right? I convinced myself that Mom's love was just expressed differently toward me. Maybe she was harder on me because she saw potential, because she wanted to make me stronger. I made excuses for every forgotten birthday call, every dismissive comment about my career in social work, every time she'd light up when Jake walked in the room like the sun had just risen. The signs were always there, glaring neon warnings I chose to ignore. Family photos where I was conveniently cut off at the edge or positioned in the back while Jake took center stage. Holiday stories that somehow never included my accomplishments, but featured lengthy retellings of Jake's high school football glory days. The way Mom would introduce me as my daughter Sarah, and Jake as my son Jake who runs his own business, never mind that his business was a failing food truck that Dad secretly funded. I remember the Thanksgiving when I announced my engagement to David, my college sweetheart. Mom's response was a tepid, "That's nice, honey," before immediately asking Jake about his new apartment. When Jake brought home a different girl every few months, each one was welcomed like a potential daughter-in-law. When I brought David around for 3 years, running, Mom still called him Dan half the time. The breaking point should have come years earlier, but I was raised to be the family peacekeeper. I swallowed my hurt, made excuses, and kept showing up because that's what daughters do. I organized family gatherings, remembered everyone's birthdays, sent thoughtful gifts, and played the role of the grateful child who just needed to try harder to earn her place at the table. Looking back now, I can see how carefully orchestrated it all was. Mom wasn't just neglectful or distracted, she was deliberately creating a hierarchy, and I was always at the bottom. Jake was the golden child who could do no wrong, Dad was the provider who deserved respect, and I was the expendable one whose feelings didn't matter enough to consider. But that Christmas morning, sitting there with an empty plate while Chelsea, a stranger who'd been dating Jake for 12 weeks, got treated like royalty, something finally snapped. The years of gaslighting, the constant message that I wasn't worth the same consideration as everyone else, it all crystallized in that moment. Mom had finally gone too far, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to just take it. The Morrison family Christmas had always been a production. Mom started preparing weeks in advance, turning our modest suburban home into something from a holiday magazine. This year was no different. Twinkling lights draped every surface. The dining room table groaned under the weight of her famous honey-glazed ham, homemade stuffing, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and 3 different kinds of pie. I'd driven 4 hours from my apartment in the city, taking precious vacation days from my job at the community center where I worked with at-risk youth. I'd brought thoughtful presents for everyone, including a beautiful silk scarf for Mom that I'd saved up for months to buy. As usual, Jake had shown up empty-handed except for Chelsea, his latest girlfriend who looked like she'd stepped out of an Instagram filter. The morning started normally enough. We opened presents in our traditional order, youngest to oldest. I watched Jake unwrap the expensive watch Mom and Dad had bought him, the same watch he'd been casually mentioning for months. My gift was a generic candle set with a Target clearance sticker still partially visible on the bottom. But it was during Christmas dinner that the real performance began. Mom bustled around the kitchen like a holiday fairy godmother, making sure everyone's plates were perfectly arranged. Dad got the first plate, loaded with all his favorites. Jake got the second, piled high enough to feed 2 people. Chelsea got the third, and Mom actually asked what she preferred and gave her extra mashed potatoes because you're so thin, sweetie, you need to eat more. Then came my turn. I stood there with my empty plate, watching Mom scan the serving dishes with a confused expression. "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "I don't think there's enough left, Sarah. I must have miscalculated." I looked at the table. There was clearly enough food for another plate, maybe even 2. The ham still had several thick slices, the stuffing dish was half full, and there were plenty of vegetables left. But Mom was already moving past me, bustling around the kitchen, avoiding my eyes. "That's okay, Mom," I heard myself say, the words automatic after years of conditioning. "I can just have some bread and salad." But Chelsea, bless her oblivious heart, piped up, "Oh, there's definitely enough food. Look, there's tons left." "Mrs. Morrison, should I help make Sarah a plate?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went through several expressions: surprise, annoyance, and finally that fake smile she reserved for uncomfortable moments. "Oh, well, I suppose there might be just enough for a small plate." She grudgingly assembled what could generously be called a child's portion: a thin slice of ham, a spoonful of stuffing, a few green beans. No mashed potatoes, no cranberry sauce, and certainly no seconds offered. Meanwhile, she was already asking Jake if he wanted more of anything. I sat there picking at my meager portion while everyone else enjoyed their feast. Dad made no comment about the obvious disparity. Jake was too busy talking to Chelsea to notice or care. And Mom kept up a steady stream of chatter about how wonderful it was to have everyone together, how special Christmas was, how much she loved having a full table. But I wasn't feeling the Christmas spirit anymore. I was doing math. Chelsea had been with Jake for exactly 84 days. I had been Mom's daughter for 28 years. And somehow, the stranger got treated better than the family member who'd never missed a holiday, never forgotten a birthday, never failed to show up when needed. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an oversight or a miscalculation. This was intentional. This was Mom's way of sending a message about my place in this family hierarchy. I was the dispensable one, the afterthought, the one whose comfort and dignity could be sacrificed without a second thought. As I sat there with my pathetic plate, watching Chelsea get offered thirds while I hadn't even gotten a proper first serving, I made a decision. I was done being the family doormat. It was time to find out exactly where I stood, and more importantly, it was time to do something about it. The ride back to my apartment was a blur of tears and rage. For hours of highway gave me plenty of time to think, and the more I thought, the angrier I got. But anger, I was learning, could be a powerful motivator. Instead of just stewing in my hurt feelings like I'd done countless times before, I decided to channel that energy into investigation. Something about that dinner felt like more than just casual favoritism. The deliberateness of it, the way Mom had looked right through me while fussing over Chelsea, it felt calculated. So I started digging, beginning with the family finances that had never made complete sense to me. Growing up, money was always tight, according to Mom. We couldn't afford family vacations, my school clothes came from discount stores, and I was told repeatedly that there was no college fund for me because times were tough. But Jake somehow always had what he needed, and then some. I'd been told he was just lucky with scholarships and jobs, but I'd never actually verified that. I started with social media, scrolling through years of family photos with fresh eyes. There was Jake's graduation trip to Europe, funded how exactly? The brand new truck he'd driven in high school while I rode the bus. The elaborate birthday parties Mom threw for him every year, while mine were always small family affairs with grocery store cake. Then I moved to public records. It's amazing what you can find online when you know where to look and have the motivation to dig. Property records, business licenses, court documents, it all started painting a picture I'd never seen before. Jake's food truck business that was supposedly struggling? It had received a $50,000 loan from an LLC registered to my parents' address. Jake's apartment in the trendy part of town that he claimed he could afford on his barista salary? The lease was co-signed by Mom and Dad, who were also listed as guarantors for the deposit and first year's rent. But the real bombshell came when I accessed my credit report for an unrelated reason and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a credit check from 3 years ago for a loan application I'd never made, using my social security number but listing my parents' address. When I dug deeper, I found evidence of financial aid applications for Jake's college years that had listed me as a dependent to lower the family's reported income and increase his aid eligibility, even though I was working and living on my own by then. They had been using my information to help Jake while simultaneously cutting me out of any actual benefits. I was listed as part of the household when it helped them get better financial aid terms, but I wasn't worth a proper Christmas dinner. The more I discovered, the more systematic the favoritism became clear. This wasn't just a case of loving one child more. This was financial fraud and identity theft dressed up as family dynamics. They had been actively stealing opportunities for me to give to Jake, then gaslighting me into thinking I was just being sensitive about normal sibling differences. I made copies of everything. Bank statements I could access through old shared accounts, screenshots of social media posts showing Jake's lifestyle that didn't match his claimed income, documentation of loans and applications made in my name or using my information without consent. I organized it all into a folder on my computer labeled Family Truth. But I didn't stop there. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Maria Santos who specialized in family financial fraud cases. It cost me 2 weeks' salary, but I needed a professional to help me understand the full scope of what had been done and what my legal options were. Maria's report was devastating and thorough. Not only had my parents been manipulating financial aid and loan applications, they'd also been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes for years after I'd moved out and was supporting myself. The IRS would be very interested to learn about that, considering I'd been filing my own returns as independent. More shocking was the discovery that there had been a college fund for me, a substantial one set up by my grandmother before she died. It had been quietly transferred to Jake's name when he graduated high school, with Mom listed as the trustee who approved the transfer. Legally questionable, morally bankrupt, and exactly the kind of thing that explained how Jake had been able to afford his lifestyle while I struggled with student loans. Armed with this information, I faced a choice. I could confront them directly and probably get gaslighted and dismissed again. I could go to authorities and potentially tear the family apart legally. Or I could do something more creative, something that would give them a taste of their own medicine while protecting myself. I chose option 3. It was time for the Morrison family to learn that actions have consequences, and that the daughter they'd spent years underestimating was capable of playing the long game just as well as they were. Sitting in my small apartment with Maria's report spread across my coffee table, I felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak. Vindication because I finally had proof that I wasn't crazy, that the treatment I'd endured wasn't normal or acceptable. Heartbreak because seeing it all documented in black and white made the betrayal feel fresh and raw all over again. But beneath those emotions was something else, a cold, calculating anger that I'd never felt before. They wanted to play games with family loyalty? They wanted to treat me like I was worthless while literally stealing from me? Fine. Game on. The first step was protecting myself legally. Maria connected me with a lawyer specializing in identity theft and financial fraud. The consultation was enlightening. I had multiple grounds for both civil and criminal action, especially regarding the unauthorized use of my social security number and the misappropriation of my grandmother's inheritance. But I didn't want to go nuclear immediately. I wanted them to understand exactly how it felt to be excluded, dismissed, and treated as less than. I wanted them to experience the same confusion and hurt they'd put me through for years. Most importantly, I wanted Jake and Mom to face consequences that actually mattered to them. My plan had several phases, each one designed to systematically dismantle the comfortable dynamic they'd built at my expense. Phase 1. Financial reality check. I started by quietly withdrawing from anything that benefited them. The family cell phone plan I'd been paying my share of for years? I switched to my own carrier. The streaming services and various subscriptions I'd been contributing to canceled my portions. The birthday and holiday gifts, the thoughtful gestures, the emotional labor of remembering everyone's important dates, done. More significantly, I began documenting everything for the IRS. If they wanted to claim me as a dependent while I was financially independent, they could explain that to the tax authorities. I filed amended returns for the past 3 years and included documentation showing I'd been independent the entire time. Phase 2. Social consequences. I started being strategic about family social media. When Mom posted her perfect family Christmas photos, I commented publicly asking why I wasn't in most of them despite being there all day. When she shared posts about loving all her children equally, I responded with heart emojis and comments like, "Thanks for always making sure I felt so included." The comments looked supportive on the surface, but anyone paying attention would start to notice a pattern. Extended family members and family friends began asking questions. Why wasn't Sarah in the Christmas photos? Why did she seem to be subtly calling out the family posts? Phase 3. Jake's reality check. This was the most satisfying part. Jake's lifestyle was built on lies and family subsidies, but he'd convinced Chelsea and his friends that he was this successful entrepreneur. I started leaving little breadcrumbs of truth where they'd find them. A casual mention to Chelsea during a family gathering about how generous Mom and Dad were to co-sign Jake's lease. A friendly comment about how nice it was that Jake had such supportive parents funding his business dreams. Nothing direct enough to be confrontational, but enough to plant seeds of doubt about Jake's carefully crafted image. I also started making strategic moves regarding Jake's food truck. The business was registered under his name, but the loan documents I discovered showed clear financial backing from our parents. I did some research on the permits and licensing. Turns out there were some irregularities in how the business was set up, particularly regarding health department inspections and tax filings. Phase 4. The long game. This was where Maria's expertise really came in handy. We identified every legal vulnerability in their financial manipulation scheme and began building airtight cases. But instead of acting immediately, we waited. I wanted them to feel secure in their pattern of behavior right up until the moment it all came crashing down. I started showing up to family events with new confidence. I stopped trying to please Mom or earn Jake's approval. When they made their little digs or dismissive comments, I'd smile pleasantly and change the subject. When they excluded me or treated me as less than, I documented it all with dates, witnesses, and sometimes even recordings. The change in my behavior was subtle but noticeable. I was no longer the desperate-to-please daughter who absorbed every slight with grace. I was polite, cordial, and completely detached from their approval. It clearly made them uncomfortable, but they couldn't quite figure out what had changed. Meanwhile, I was building my own life independent of their toxicity. I got a promotion at work, moved to a better apartment, and started dating someone who actually valued and respected me. I made new friends who didn't know the old, doormat version of me. I was becoming the person I should have been all along if I hadn't spent years having my self-worth systematically undermined. But the real masterstroke was still coming. I had learned something valuable from years of being underestimated. People don't see you as a threat when they think you're harmless. Mom and Jake had no idea what was coming because they'd spent so long seeing me as weak and inconsequential. They were about to learn that underestimating someone for years doesn't make them weak. It makes them patient, strategic, and very, very motivated to prove a point. Hey everyone, I know this story is getting intense, and I can see some of you are probably feeling that familiar family drama anxiety right about now. Trust me, I was living it, so I completely understand. But here's the thing about family revenge stories. They're only satisfying when justice is actually served, right? And let me tell you, we're just getting to the good part. So make sure you stick around because what happens next is going to make all of this build-up worth it. The way karma finally came for my family is something that still gives me chills when I think about it. Keep watching, because part 6 is where everything starts to unravel for them, and honestly, it's beautiful. By spring, the foundation of the Morrison family's carefully constructed facade was starting to show serious cracks. My strategic withdrawal from their support system was having exactly the effect I'd hoped for, but even I was surprised by how quickly things began to unravel. The first domino to fall was Jake's relationship with Chelsea. My subtle comments about family financial support had done their job perfectly. Chelsea started asking Jake direct questions about his business funding and living arrangements. Jake, who had never been good at thinking on his feet, got defensive and started contradicting himself. The breaking point came when Chelsea discovered the co-signed lease agreement in their apartment. Jake had told her he qualified for the place on his own merit and income. Finding out his parents were essentially guaranteeing his ability to live there shattered her image of him as an independent, successful entrepreneur. But Chelsea's reaction was even better than I'd hoped. Instead of just breaking up with Jake quietly, she aired their dirty laundry on social media. A series of Instagram stories detailing Jake's lies about his financial independence, complete with screenshots of lease documents and business registration records that showed the family's involvement. Mom was mortified. Her precious golden child was being publicly exposed as a fraud, and worse, it was happening in front of all their family friends and community connections. She immediately went into damage control mode, calling Chelsea unstable and jealous, but the documentation was all public record. The truth was undeniable. Jake's food truck business started suffering almost immediately. Chelsea's social media expose had been seen by many of his regular customers, and word spread quickly in their small business community. People started questioning other aspects of his business practices, and soon he was dealing with health department investigations that he'd previously been able to avoid through family connections. Meanwhile, my own strategic moves were bearing fruit. The IRS had begun an audit of my parents' tax returns after my amended filings raised red flags about their dependent claims. They were suddenly facing potential penalties and interest on years of fraudulent deductions. The college fund revelation came to light during the audit process. When government investigators started digging into financial transfers and family trusts, they discovered the suspicious movement of my grandmother's inheritance fund. What my parents had done wasn't technically illegal. The trust documents gave Mom broad discretionary powers as trustee, but it was ethically questionable and potentially actionable under a state law. More importantly, other family members started learning about the fund transfer. My Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, had assumed I'd received my inheritance and had simply been too polite to mention it. When she discovered the truth during a family gathering, she was furious. "You mean Sarah never got Grandma's college money?" she asked Mom directly, in front of several other relatives. That fund was specifically set up for both grandchildren's education. How could you justify giving it all to Jake? Mom's explanation, that Jake needed it more because he was pursuing a business degree, fell flat with the extended family. Especially when they learned Jake had dropped out after 2 years and used the remaining money to fund his food truck venture. The social dynamics within our extended family began shifting dramatically. Relatives who had always seen me as the quiet one started reaching out to check on me. They began sharing their own observations about the favoritism they'd witnessed over the years, things they'd noticed but never felt comfortable addressing directly. Aunt Linda was particularly supportive. She confided that she'd always felt uncomfortable with how differently Mom treated Jake and me, but had assumed it was just parenting style differences. Learning about the financial manipulation made her realize the situation was much more serious than casual favoritism. Dad, who had always been the silent enabler in Mom and Jake's dynamic, was struggling to handle the external pressure. The IRS audit was stressing him out enormously, and he was starting to resent Mom's financial decisions that had put the family at legal risk. Their marriage was showing strain under the pressure of public scrutiny and official investigations. But the most satisfying development was watching Jake deal with real consequences for the first time in his life. Without the safety net of family support and public image management, he was floundering. The food truck was failing, Chelsea had moved out and blocked him on all social media, and he was facing potential legal issues related to his business permits and tax filings. For the first time in his life, Jake couldn't run to Mom to fix his problems. She was too busy dealing with her own legal and social issues to focus entirely on protecting him. He was experiencing what I'd lived with for years, having to handle difficulties without unconditional family backup. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake, who had always been positioned as the capable, independent one, was completely falling apart without constant family support. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my new life, building genuine relationships and professional success based on my own merit rather than family connections. Mom tried reaching out to me several times during this period, but her approach was predictably self-serving. Instead of acknowledging the harm she'd caused or apologizing for years of mistreatment, she wanted me to help manage the family crisis. She actually asked me to talk to Chelsea about toning down her social media posts and to help mediate between Jake and his angry customers. I politely declined each request. "I'm sure Jake can handle his own business problems," I told her. "After all, you've always said how capable and independent he is." The frustration in her voice when she realized I wasn't going to be her usual compliant problem solver was incredibly satisfying. But I wasn't done yet. The foundation had cracked, but I wanted the whole structure to come down. Phase 4 of my plan was about to begin, and it would ensure that the Morrison family learned once and for all that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve systematically mistreating someone for decades. Summer brought the culmination of months of careful planning, and I was ready to play my final cards. The family was already reeling from Jake's public humiliation, the IRS audit, and the growing awareness among extended family about years of financial manipulation. But I had one more revelation that would change everything permanently. Maria, my private investigator, had been digging deeper into the family's financial history and had uncovered something that made my grandmother's inheritance transfer look like small change. There had been another fund, a life insurance payout from my grandfather's death when I was 15, that was supposed to be split equally between Jake and me for our future education and first home purchases. That money, nearly $200,000 total, had been quietly moved into investments under Mom's control and had grown substantially over the years. Jake had already received his portion to help with his business ventures, but my half had been sitting in an account I'd never been told about, earning interest while I struggled with student loans and rental payments. The discovery of this fund was the smoking gun I needed. Unlike the trust fund situation, which involved Mom's discretionary powers as trustee, this insurance money had explicit legal documentation stating it should be divided equally between her children when they reached age 25. I had turned 25 3 years ago, and they had never mentioned a penny of it. Armed with this information and backed by solid legal documentation, I made my move. But I didn't go straight to lawyers or authorities. Instead, I decided to give my family one last chance to do the right thing voluntarily. I called a family meeting at a neutral location, a private room at a local restaurant where they couldn't storm out or control the environment. I told them I had important family matters to discuss, and surprisingly, they all showed up. Even Jake, who had been avoiding family gatherings since his public embarrassment with Chelsea. I came prepared with copies of all my documentation, the insurance paperwork, the investment account statements, the evidence of unauthorized use of my personal information for financial applications, and the tax audit findings. I laid it all out on the table systematically, watching their faces as they realized how much I knew. Mom went through the classic stages of being caught: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, a pathetic attempt at emotional manipulation. "Sarah, sweetheart, we were saving it for when you really needed it," she claimed, as if hoarding my inheritance for years while I struggled financially was somehow protective parenting. Jake's reaction was even more telling. Instead of showing any remorse for benefiting from stolen opportunities, he got defensive about deserving the extra support because he was taking bigger risks with his entrepreneurial ventures. The entitlement was breathtaking. Dad, true to form, tried to play peacemaker while avoiding responsibility. "Can't we just work this out as a family?" he kept saying, as if years of financial fraud and emotional abuse were just minor miscommunications that could be smoothed over with good intentions. I gave them a simple ultimatum. They had 30 days to transfer my rightful inheritance, with interest, to an account of my choosing. They needed to file corrected tax returns acknowledging their fraudulent dependent claims and pay any resulting penalties. And they owed me a public acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused, along with genuine apologies. "If you do these things," I told them calmly, "we can try to rebuild some kind of relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. If you don't, I'll be taking legal action for financial fraud, identity theft, and fiduciary negligence. And trust me, I have enough documentation to make those charges stick." Mom's response was predictably manipulative. She started crying and talking about how I was tearing the family apart and being vindictive over misunderstandings. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she'd made financial decisions with good intentions and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel to family. Jake joined in with his own victim narrative, claiming I was jealous of his success and trying to punish him for being more ambitious than me. The lack of self-awareness was stunning. He was calling his fraud-funded lifestyle success and couldn't see the irony. But their manipulation tactics didn't work anymore. I had spent months preparing for exactly these responses, and I was immune to their gaslighting now. I had evidence, I had legal backing, and most importantly, I had finally found my backbone. "You have 30 days, I repeated, standing up to leave. "What you do with them is up to you, but the consequences of your choices are no longer my problem to manage." As I walked away from that table, leaving them sitting there with copies of all their financial crimes spread out in front of them, I felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to my family: complete emotional freedom. I no longer cared about their approval, their love, or their opinion of me. I cared about justice, accountability, and protecting myself from further harm. The 30-day countdown had begun, and I was prepared for any choice they made. If they wanted to do the right thing, we might salvage some kind of relationship. If they wanted to dig in their heels and fight, I was ready for war. Either way, the days of treating me like a second-class family member were over forever. The 30 days came and went with predictable results. Instead of acknowledging wrongdoing and making things right, my family chose to double down on their victim narrative. Mom actually had the audacity to send me a text saying I was being unreasonable and destroying family bonds over money. Jake blocked me on social media and told extended family members that I was extorting them over normal family financial decisions. Their response told me everything I needed to know about their true character. They would rather fight dirty than admit fault, would rather destroy relationships than accept accountability. So I gave them exactly what they'd chosen: the full legal consequences of their actions. My lawyer filed a comprehensive lawsuit including charges of financial fraud, identity theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The case was airtight thanks to Maria's thorough investigation and the documentation I'd been collecting for months. Within weeks, their bank accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. The IRS audit results came back with substantial penalties and interest charges. Mom and Dad owed over $40,000 in back taxes and fraud penalties, money they didn't have readily available thanks to years of secretly funding Jake's lifestyle. The financial stress was enormous, and their marriage couldn't handle the pressure. Dad filed for divorce 6 months later, citing financial irresponsibility and deception. But the most satisfying justice came in the form of social consequences. The lawsuit became a matter of public record, and local media picked up the story of family financial fraud. Mom's reputation in their community was destroyed. She had spent years positioning herself as the perfect mother and upstanding citizen, only to be exposed as someone who would steal from her own daughter to benefit her favored child. Jake's food truck business collapsed entirely under the weight of public scrutiny and legal challenges. Without family financial backing and with his reputation in ruins, he couldn't maintain the permits and licenses needed to operate. He ended up having to move back in with Mom, a 30-year-old man with no assets, no relationship, and no prospects. The legal settlement was everything I'd hoped for and more. I received my full inheritance with compound interest, totaling nearly $300,000. The court also awarded damages for the emotional distress and fraudulent use of my identity. Most importantly, there was a legal acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong, official validation that I wasn't being oversensitive or vindictive. But the money, satisfying as it was, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was my freedom from their toxic dynamic and the family I built for myself afterward. I used some of the settlement money to fund a nonprofit organization helping young adults who'd been financially abused by family members. Turns out, my story wasn't unique. There are thousands of people whose families have stolen identities, diverted inheritances, or manipulated financial aid systems for favoritism. We provide legal resources, emotional support, and practical assistance for breaking free from financial family abuse. My personal life flourished in ways I never could have imagined while trapped in their dysfunction. I married David, the man who'd stood by me through the whole ordeal and saw my worth even when my own family didn't. We bought a beautiful home with some of my settlement money and started building the kind of family I'd always wanted, one based on genuine love, respect, and equality. The extended family relationships I'd feared losing were actually strengthened by the truth. Aunt Linda and other relatives expressed relief that the family's open secret of favoritism had finally been addressed. Many of them admitted they'd been uncomfortable with the dynamic for years, but hadn't known how to intervene. 3 years later, I occasionally get messages from Mom asking to reconcile and move past this. She still doesn't understand that accountability must come before reconciliation. She wants forgiveness without acknowledging harm, relationship without responsibility. Jake has never reached out at all, still apparently convinced he was the victim in our family story. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires emotional energy I'd rather spend on people who value me. I feel sorry for them, trapped in their patterns of dysfunction and unable to recognize how their choices destroyed their family. But I don't miss them and I don't regret standing up for myself. So here's my question for everyone watching this. Have you ever been in a situation where family treated you like you didn't matter, where favoritism was so obvious it took your breath away? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were working against you behind your scenes? What did you do about it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's dealt with family betrayal like this. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps other people find these videos when they're struggling with their own family drama. And definitely subscribe because I share stories about justice, karma, and standing up for yourself regularly. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from family, because blood relationship doesn't give anyone the right to abuse or diminish you. Thank you all for watching and for supporting each other in the comments. I've learned that the family we choose can be so much more meaningful than the family we're born into. Sometimes the best thing you can do for toxic family members is show them there are consequences for their choices, and sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is build a life so good that their approval becomes irrelevant. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, especially by the people who claim to love you. Never let anyone convince you that abuse is normal just because it comes from family. Stand up for yourself, document everything, and don't be afraid to seek justice when people cross the line. Life is too short to spend it begging for scraps of love from people who should be giving it freely.